Hey there, I'm Scott, and this is Tangents. Well, I think I recorded the last one of these a couple days ago. It is the 23rd of, I was going to say July somehow, but 23rd of January, 2023. Um, there's a thing, I know a lot of people have trouble with the next year. I always have been, like, even when I've written checks, not that I do that much, I've always been like a year ahead. Like it'll be 2022 and my impulse is to write the next year for the second half of 2022 instead of the previous year. I don't know what that says about me psychologically, but it's not something that I've ever struggled with, and it just seemed remarkable in the sense of worth remarking on, not like, oh my God, that's amazing. So anyway, it is Monday morning at 9:15, and usually at this time, I would be working, and usually at this time, I'd probably be in a meeting. Although we're fully distributed, so one thing that has happened recently is I'm in Arizona, and in the winter, we're an hour ahead of California. My business partner is in California. We have somebody, well, we have somebody else who's in San Francisco. We have somebody in Portland. We have somebody in Washington. And so there's a big center of mass that's over there. And right now it's only 8:15 their time. So our meetings have all gotten pushed back to like 10 anyway. And then because of various things with our business, which I'm a little annoyed about, um, things are sort of slower at the moment. Probably will rush into. I might talk about that actually for a minute, but at the moment, my 10 o'clock meeting is now at 10:30, or is now gone for at least on hiatus, let's say, and I have a 10:30 meeting. So I've got like an hour where I can record this now. I do have somebody who is coming for pest control, which means to spray nerve agents essentially around the place. When I was gone, when I was in Japan, the dude came by and wasn't able to get in the backyard. So my landlord messaged me and was like, "Oh, could you let this guy in?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, in another fucking country. It'd be hard, but I'll be back here." And then she scheduled. And anyway, the thing I wanted to talk about, and I have several things, but the thing I really wanted to talk about, and I feel like I just got back from the trip. I should talk about the trip. To begin with, I've I don't know if living in Paris for 9 months counts as living there, or if it's like a extended stay. I stayed in Japan for almost a month, um, and I have the impulse really. I have a strong like I need to get the fuck out of Gilbert impulse first of all. If you don't know Arizona, um, Gilbert is the domain of Andy Biggs, and that should tell you a lot. This is a place dominated by who are on LSD, or LDS rather, and it's a very air quotes conservative place. What annoys me about that endlessly is that if they were genuinely conservative, uh, I wouldn't mind them as much. But they're most of them are just culturally aligned with this one party that has branded themselves as conservative, and they don't really think about what conservative means. And then they also, the people who sell this, the people who really kind of are activists and push their party, they're not conservative at all. They're radical anarcho-capitalists. These are people who are, they essentially want to tear down all of our systems. They want to tear down democracy, um, in a very real way. The Kochs. It sounds conspiratorially minded, but the Koch brothers have spent really, I think, more than my lifetime trying to undermine our democracy. They yesterday was or would have been crap. Hello.
Hey, Blue Sky Pest Control.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm just here to take care of the backyard.
Okay, cool. It should be open.
Okay. Was it always open?
It wasn't last time.
Okay.
I was out of the country
Yeah,
though, I'm sorry.
I wasn't here at the time, but I was just reading about it. So cool. Everything going okay with the bugs? Anything out of the ordinary?
I haven't seen anything, no.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, have a good day. Double check. Hey, back. I knew that was going to happen. So it is funny, like it was scheduled for like 8 to 10, and hour 15 minutes into that, nothing. As soon as I start recording, 5 minutes in. So anyway, I will edit that part out, but I will leave the periphery of it. Hi, I just was running around. Somehow the gate in the back that I opened must have blown closed or something, which is fine. It doesn't seem to actually stop people from getting in, because the dudes who do yard work never seem to have a problem getting back there, which always kind of creeps me out. You know, you have, I don't know, guys with leaf blowers out there, and it just, I don't begrudge them for doing their jobs, but the leaf blower just in general is such a fucked up thing. It's loud, it's a two-stroke engine, which means that it's, just by design, it's not burning all of the gas. And they mix the fuel and the lubricant together, so it's putting out a lot of unburnt gas, incomplete combustion products, and oil, which is not great for the environment. Or when I say the environment, I mean us. You know, we're out breathing this shit. It's loud, it's obnoxious, it's blowing up big clouds of dust and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, don't want to get into that. Coming back, I was in Japan for a month, and I've been out of the country, I guess in total for my whole life, probably a bit over a year. I don't know how much exactly, I've never added it up. I've gone on a few trips that were like a month long, and then you add those together. You have the Japan one, you have 9 months living in France. It's probably 13, 14 months I've spent out of the country. So not the most, in terms of percentage of my life, not a huge number. And in terms of overall experience, not that great. But, and I will say this, there's a whole thing like, you know, wherever you go, there you are. And, you know, like this idea that wherever you happen to be, you still have the same problems. And this is true. You know, you are you. Your life is your life. And there's something to be said for, you're going to be there, and you still have to, you know, it's not like going to a different place magically changes things for you. Absolutely, this is true. In fact, it probably makes things more difficult if you're having certain kinds of problems. Like if you are having problems connecting with people and you go to a different country, unless you're going as an exchange student or in some kind of a program like that, you're going to be more isolated, not less. You really need either to be extremely active and kind of outgoing and figuring out how to get involved in things, or you're going to be someplace and, or you need some kind of an in. somebody who can connect you to those things, some kind of system that puts you into them. Or you're just going to be in another country, more isolated. I don't know if you can hear that. There's a weird, I assume that it's the pest control guy. Weird squeaky sound. If you can't hear it, apologies. Anyway, or if you can hear it, also apologies. It's very distracting though. I assume that it's not coming through because I can hear it, but I think the mic is pretty good at just isolating what I'm doing. So to you, it's just me responding to nothing. Moving from that though, wherever you are, wherever you go, there you are. Being someplace else doesn't magically change your life, probably makes things more stressful. That being said, there are major differences in different places. And there are certain things which, I don't know, they will impact your life. Certainly, like, I mean, the most obvious one, and one of the ones that I really can't stand here and really like about London and Paris and New York and Tokyo and frankly even a lot of smaller European cities and some Asian cities and some public transit and walkability. Now, to be fair, part of walkability and part of what makes public transit really work is density. And Phoenix is almost by its nature very sparse. People have, it's a weird thing when I remember after my little 9-month stay in Paris, I came back and I'm flying into Sky Harbor, and you fly over Phoenix on the little flight path, and it's so goddamn sparse. So sparse, it's crazy. You see how spread out things are, how little density there is. And when you've just spent 9 months in a pretty dense city and visiting other dense cities around, it's a stark contrast. And that intrinsically means that, if you're going to walk a certain distance here, you're not going to interact with as many people, you're not going to see as much stuff. It's hard to have, like, density brings a lot of things. Like, you can have vending machines on every corner, you can have ramen shops on every corner. You can have a thing where you walk down a street and there are 15 restaurants in a 5 or 10 minute walk because there are so many people there, so much foot traffic that it supports that. In Phoenix, if you tried to do that, they would all go out of business because people are so spread out. They would never, unless there's something remarkable that brings people to those places, there's nothing that would work. And then here it's also very pure residential use. So you have a lot of places like where I am, which are just houses and not apartments really, but just houses and single family kind of stuff in this giant patch, which means that, like, walking around my neighborhood is not bad because we have sidewalks, and it's kind of whatever the spatial version of anachronism is, it sort of feels like back east. A lot of trees, a lot of yards and things like this. Really feels out of place, frankly, in the desert, but it's kind of nice. I don't mind it. Other than that, I'm sure it's really hard to maintain and not great for water use and all of this. Every time there's any kind of a windstorm, which happens more than a handful of times a year, all these pine trees out here, and yes, pine trees in the desert seems ridiculous too, but all of these pine trees that are in my yard shed shit tons of needles, and the street is just blanketed in these yellow, which if there was a fire or something when those things are out there, it would just rip through everything, right? Of course, they have people come out with the leaf blowers and all of this, and they clean this stuff up the next day or in a couple days. But it's just, it's a high maintenance thing. If you didn't have those people coming out, it would instantly be blanketed in that shit. And also instantly, I'm sure, as soon as you get a fire, it would just take out the whole neighborhood. So like, you just imagine what happens if people are not maintaining things, or if people kind of just went away. I always think about garbage because I've been in New York and Paris during garbage strikes, and just not picking up the garbage in these big cities for like a week or two, you see how much builds up, and it really makes you, or make me appreciate and realize how important garbage collection is. You know, it's one of these things that people act like, oh, it doesn't really matter. You know, we shouldn't pay these people too much or any of this kind of stuff. If they stop working, I mean, it's kind of a thing that annoys me that there aren't more strikes here, because all it would take is a few weeks of not collecting garbage and people would go, oh shit, we really depend on these people. You better pay them well. You better take care of them. Because if you don't, we're fucked, really. And there are so many other things, like these guys out here cleaning the needles out. If they didn't do that, the whole fucking neighborhood would just be blanketed in them. And I'm sure it wouldn't happen like instantly that there'd be a fire. But if they stopped doing it for, say, order of years, very quickly there would be some kind of a fire, and it would take out the entire area, and all of these houses would just be gone, because they're all wood frame construction. They're all bunched up against these needles. And in Arizona, everything like that gets desiccated instantly. So it's kindling, basically. Anyway, coming back. When you're in a different place, you're still you. Definitely true. But having density, having walkability, having the ability to go, and yeah, I can walk here, but if I walk any direction for a half hour, if I walk that way to the west for like 20 minutes, I get to downtown Gilbert, air quotes downtown Gilbert, and yeah, there's stuff there. There are some restaurants. It's not really much. And if I go pretty much any other direction, or if I just blink when I go through there, there's just nothing. It's a desert. And when I say it's a desert, I don't mean that it's a desert, but I mean, you know, like it's just endless sea of houses and not a lot to do. It's something I feel like there are lots of things about density that are annoying. Like, you know, if you feel like people are on top of you and all of this, it really depends to some extent on the place. I'm sure, never have been to India, but I know they have some very dense cities there. And things are such that, you know, anytime you go out in the street, you just always feel like there are a lot of people there. That's probably difficult for someone like me who likes a little bit of space. But when you think about, you know, in Paris and London, they have decent density. In New York, they have decent density. And there are a lot of people, in Tokyo, they have decent density. There are a lot of people on the street, but it's not that bad. Right? People are kind of minding their own business. Paris, they do have a thing where they kind of get in each other's way, which is a little bit annoying. But other than that, people are pretty much not bothering you. And so it is dense, but it's not like people, I don't have the feeling in these places that everybody's on top of me. And I don't have the feeling, especially if I'm walking alone. It's different when you have, like, you're walking with somebody. But when I'm walking alone, I can swim through crowded sidewalks and city streets pretty easily. And I don't really feel like people are getting in my way. I don't really feel like it doesn't feel like problematic per se. And it is nice to be able to find some space alone. Now, one thing that Tokyo has that is kind of remarkable is that it's a very big, dense city. And it's extraordinary in that, like, if you're in the center of New York, or you're in the center of London, or the center of Paris, you can walk, and it's not like a 5-minute walk, but you can walk pretty quickly and find yourself out of the city. Driving is a different matter. It's hard to navigate. But still, the city itself, like if you're looking at an aerial view, it's not that big. You know, things kind of get sparse pretty fast. Tokyo, it's kind of ridiculous. Like you're in the center of Tokyo, and if you go one way, eventually you hit water. So there's just nothing there. But well, I mean, there's water, but not city. But everywhere else, for as far as you can see in every direction, is city. Or yeah, it may not be technically Tokyo, it's like the outskirts or adjacent cities, but they're all kind of confluently grown into each other. And yet, and I think this is largely cultural, when I was there, it was amazingly quiet. Like, and not in an eerie sense, not in a negative sense, but they have things where like on the train, people are not talk. They have signs up that say, and the thing that comes on and says, you know, like don't have a phone call on the train. And so you don't have loud people doing that. If people are having conversations on the train, they're quiet. They're not trying to like have the whole fucking world hear whatever they're talking about. They're and the extraordinary thing is like there are all these people out. 10 o'clock at night, fucking quiet. It could have been a small town, kind of quiet. I was shocked by that because I've been in New York. New York is kind of the opposite of this, where it'll be in the middle. It'll be like 1 or 2 in the evening, 1 or 2 a.m. I mean, in the middle of the middle of the night. And if you're in New York, there's always some noise going on, just perpetually. It seems like there's construction like in the middle of the night. There's like banging and people talking and just. I've never had the experience of being there and being like, wow, it's really quiet. It's, you know, not that I've been there that long. I would like to live in that city for a little while too. But it's just such a stark difference. Paris is pretty quiet. They do, like, things shut down earlier there. Um, there's a time at night where it's pretty quiet. But Tokyo is like the far extreme. And then I'd put New York at the other end of the extreme for cities, at least, that I've been in. And then there's the public transit. Now, again, this is something that density enables. And here, just because it's so sparse, it's I do think eventually things will kind of become dense. I mean, if you went to Paris in the year 800, or London or New York, you probably notice that like there's not a city there, right? Or it's Paris and London were at least settlements, but you know they're not like really dense and big. There was a time, and I'm not saying that Phoenix is like London in the first millennium, but Phoenix is a little bit like some of these cities 100 years ago. I think. I think you know you look at the light rail and you're like, it's not very good yet, but you could imagine in 30 years or in 50 years that eventually sort of spreading out and coming to places like Gilbert, going to Scottsdale, and probably getting some other lines and doing some other stuff, and eventually it maybe becomes a thing. You go into Tempe, and just in the time that I've been here, the density has increased so much. You can kind of squint a little bit and imagine that at one point in the future, this could be a real city, in the sense of being, you know, like having dense areas that have lots of stuff going on and have all these nice things that I like. I do think that's a pretty long time scale, and I do think also there's a lot of opposition to it for no reason. Like there are people, I've talked about this many times, but everybody running for Gilbert City Council was talking about how they didn't want the light rail to be expanded in here, which is just going to look stupid in 50, like assuming there's no massive collapse. 50 years from now, the light rail will come to Gilbert, right? It seems inevitable. And in retrospect, people will think that it was silly not to want that because it'll seem like awesome. And these people just, to me now, look stupid, but with the perspective of history, will look very stupid. And not even like short-sighted, but just dumb. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? People are opposed to multifamily housing. They were all like, oh no, we're not going to have apartments. It's like, all of that kind of stuff gives you this urban sprawl, kind of infinite suburb just not great experience. And I will say also, like, most of these these neighborhoods, it's not like you have some expansive yard. It's not like you have all this space to yourself. You have a decently big house, maybe, and a lot of room, although not very well used, not very well organized. That was a thing that I've been in small places and a lot of places. In Tokyo and really in all of Japan, every time I was in any kind of hotel, I guess the one exception was in Nagano. It's not like super dense. So the rooms are bigger, they're more like American size, because they don't have like a lot of pressure to make things small. But every place that I was there, things would be small but efficient, and you'd kind of look at that and you'd be like, wow, it's actually comfortable. Like the hotel room that I stayed at while I was in Tokyo wasn't huge. It was half the size of this room, probably. I mean, maybe a little bit, maybe not half, maybe 2/3 of the size of the room that I'm recording this in. But it felt fine, actually. Like, I wouldn't necessarily want to live there permanently because you have the bedroom or the bed in with your desk and stuff, and But if you had a way to put the bed away, and just or a second room that was kind of similarly laid out, it was quite comfortable. I was shocked by that, and it really makes me appreciate how inefficiently places here use space. I'm a person that likes big rooms and a lot of space, but most of the space here is just not efficiently done. You look at, I mean, it's a kind of funny thing. You go to big houses and, like 10,000 square foot kind of place. To some extent, you feel like they're just building more room and more rooms. Not because they need them or they want them, but just because they want to hit that number. It's just, I need to have all this space. Why? What are you doing? And you look at that stuff also and you're like, you're not even using some of these rooms. Or, it's like more than a full house worth of space that they're just not really occupying. And it's so inefficient. And if I was going to have a bigger house, first of all, I don't think I'd want 10,000 square feet, but if I had something like that, I'd have it utilized somehow. You'd want to have some kind of life in there, and have it maybe a little bit more expansive and maybe a little bit more comfortable in that sense, but not just wasted space. It was a thing that I noticed there. So anyway, the thing that I'm kind of dancing around here is, obviously it's not like your life magically changes or improves automatically by going someplace else. And anyone who thinks that that would be the case is going to be very surprised. That being said, first off, I think everybody, really everybody, especially if you've never had the experience, you should spend a significant amount of time in another city. And I mean, if you came from Paris, you should spend some time in the Midwest. Go, like, seriously, if you're from Tokyo, go out to fucking Ohio and see what it's like living out there, just to have the experience. But I think the more important one is that if you're from Phoenix or someplace like this, go to one of these cities, and probably someplace that's really, New York is still an American city. It's as European, I think, as we get, but still, you don't feel like you would get kind of into the American rhythm there. Go to another country. Go someplace where they speak a different language and have a different culture and experience that. And especially, I think there's a thing where people visit and a very tourist experience. And I'm not saying that I'm not a tourist and I'm not having like a tourist experience. I went and I saw fucking snow monkeys. I mean, it's hard to get more touristy than that, right? But at the same time, actually live there. Live there and live there for longer than I've been anyplace else. Live there for a year. Live there for a couple years. Feel what it's like to have to get your teeth cleaned there. Feel what it's like to have to deal with the bureaucracy. You know, I I have lots of positive things to say about Tokyo and about Paris dealing with the bureaucracy. And the funny thing is, I think Tokyo is supposed to be even worse, or Japan is supposed to have even worse bureaucracy than France. And France, they fucking love the bureaucracy. I mean, it's if I was going to criticize the place, you know, that just as somebody who like skimmed the surface, I could feel it a little bit, but I can't imagine. Like you can get stuff done, but it just takes so much time and effort, and you have to be willing to go through the process, and it'd be very frustrating. And you know, once you got settled in, it'd be fine. But like getting a bank account, getting an apartment, getting just getting the utilities set up, and all of this kind of stuff, it would take time. It would be painful, and once it's done, you're kind of okay. But getting there and figuring out how to do it the first time, you would be very frustrated. And in Tokyo, like you have to get, or in Japan, you have to get the little stamp and you have to do all the, and they've got fax machines are like still a big thing. And it just, and then of course you have the additional complication of not only is there all this bureaucracy, but you don't understand the language necessarily, you don't understand the culture, you don't understand like how do you get, like there are certain things where if I want to have a bank account and I'm from a country, I kind of know the process just passively from that experience. But you know, if you're a foreigner, if you're an expat living someplace, you got to figure that shit out. And increasingly, I will say, like the first time I went to another country, um, I think it was after iPhones existed, but it was still not like great for data roaming. It was not great for, I mean, there was Wi Fi, so you could use that if you could find a place. But getting around was a little bit harder. Translation wasn't as good, all this kind of stuff. Right now, you could go, as long as you have a data roaming plan and you have a decent, like an iPhone or something, you could go anywhere in the world, navigate around remarkably well. And I mean, I guess the problem would be if you're someplace like way out in the steppe and you're like, there's just not cell service. That will end at one point too, though, because you'll have low altitude satellite connections and probably, and again, everything I say that's like about the future, with the asterisk, assuming society doesn't collapse and things kind of continue on an okay path, you'll be able to go anywhere in the world and know exactly where you are, download maps and detailed instructions about how to do everything. And it really makes the world much more open. It's frustrating that politically we have like if you spend some time in Europe now and you're in the Shenzhen area, you can just travel freely. And it's like this is the way fucking it should be. If someone was born in Spain and they want to work in the Netherlands, they can. That's how it should fucking be. And it wasn't always that way. Within my lifetime, it wasn't that way. And you look now, and there are all of these people who are opposed to immigration, and they're like, oh, we gotta tighten up the borders and all this stupid bullshit. Fuck that. We should have a global Shenzhen area. Like, if I want to work in, if I want to move for a year or two and live in Australia, or somebody from there wants to come here, or Japan, or Korea, or pretty much anywhere in the world, that should just be an easy thing. If I want to live in Mexico for a few years, or somebody from Mexico wants to live here for a few years, or move, actually immigrate, it should just be like a natural, like it should be the same level of thought of if I want to move to California, for example. Which is to say, it's a big move. It's not something that you take lightly necessarily. It's not like you just arbitrarily go. But it shouldn't be like massive. It shouldn't be that big of a deal. And it's not like you go to Spain and all of the Spanish culture and identity has been subsumed by the ability of people to move around freely. It's still Spain. It's not. It's the most ridiculous thing. You see people who are just xenophobic and don't want this kind of thing to work. Although magically, it's hard to exclude the fact that there's some racism there because if somebody's talking about like Canada to the US, oh, that's fine. Somehow Mexico or South or Central America, it's like, you know. And even then, I would assume that if you have, it's not just racism. It's not just a matter of like not wanting brown people here, but also socioeconomic status. If you have people who are like engineers from Monterey, people probably are a little bit more relaxed about that than somebody who's coming here and they're just going to work on a farm, which is really kind of sad because that person, like the engineer, I'm not saying that engineering, thing that I do a lot of, I'm not saying it's not an essential service, but picking produce, feeding us, if you don't have people doing that, we will die. I mean, we'd figure something out, but our lives would be much harder. And we have the ability now to go to the grocery store and get fresh fruit and vegetables. And it's all on the backs of people who are doing jobs that most people, who are xenophobic wouldn't want to do. And one of the things that you have to think is, and especially the more you look into this, all of these like tight borders and all this kind of stuff, it doesn't keep people from going back and forth. That stuff just happens. What it does do is basically remove the ability of people who have come here illegally, who would have come legally if there was a route, and they're now stuck in bad conditions, basically working under the table, working in situations where they're not subject to labor laws. They can be, they're not subject to minimum wage. They can be underpaid. They can be overworked. They can be worked in horrible conditions. And all the people who are running those companies love the fact that they can sit there and threaten people with like, it would be a damn shame if somebody reported you and then you had to be deported. Like, never mind the person doing that stuff never faces any consequences. And I say never. I mean, like there are Elizabeth Holmeses who do face consequences, but most of the time, people will kind of skirt by. And the people who get fucked are the poor people who are actually doing the hard work and getting exploited. And I mean, this is one of the reasons why it should just be a Shenzhen area. And if you did that also, and you did it right, magically things start equilibrating and socioeconomic status increases in places that, and actually, I mean, this has happened anyway. There's net negative immigration to Mexico now, I believe. So, people have this idea like, oh, we can't have, turns out things are not so great here anymore and things are not so bad there anymore, that it's not like there's all of that pressure. It's a thing. It's also a thing I think worth bringing up, that in addition to this whole kind of weirdness, you have, well, I don't want to, it's like a whole other episode worth of information about talking about how many drugs are illegal here. And you'll see all of these things, and this actually, it's funny that it ties very closely into immigration and this kind of stuff. But I see all of these news stories about fentanyl and all of this. And all I can think every time I see one of these is, motherfucker, if you made these things, because these things are illegal, you're creating a black market. You're basically giving obscene amounts of money to criminals in other countries and fucking up these other countries. And in addition to that, because they're illegal, there's no regulation, there's no testing, there's none of this. So criminals, it turns out, will cheat and they'll do things that are not great. And so they'll doctor their stuff with fentanyl or with some other, horse tranquilizer or whatever the fuck, because there's nothing to keep them from doing that. It's the fact that you have these regulations that are supposed to magically keep stuff out that don't work, that drive up costs and make things worse. But anyway, I'm gonna talk more about Japan later. I am feeling the urgent need to leave and get some stuff done, but I just wanted to say, like, there is that thing, which is wherever you go, there you are. And, if you're not happy here, then you won't be happy there or whatever. That's true. But being someplace else sometimes does have, if you're in Minnesota and you're miserable from the cold, or you're in Arizona and you're miserable from the heat, and you move someplace that's got a climate that's more comfortable to you, it won't magically change everything about your life, but it will change some things that'll matter. If you go someplace, if you're like living here and you go someplace which is walkable and has public transit, and maybe like Japan, people are wearing masks and they're being respectful of other people and they're not being assholes. And I mean, the thing that really struck me, I think I've talked about this before. I might make a whole episode on this, but just coming back to the U.S. was like going to Caracas. I had the same feeling exactly when I went there, and it was like, look at the disparity, look at how fucked up the infrastructure is and all of this. Come here and it's like, oh my God, you have homeless people, and then you have these mansions right across the street from them, and or unhoused people, and things are just so fucked up, and people just live there like it's normal. And we're a rich country, it does not need to be like this. So anyway, with that, I will talk more about this later, and thank you very much. 再见。